There's a story that every perfectionist leader tells themselves. My standards are what makes this team great. I care more than anyone else in the room. I just need things done right. And here's what the data says. That story is costing you more than you know. This video is for you if you've ever been told that your standards are hard to meet and you took that as a compliment. If you work harder than anyone on your team, rewrite drafts that don't need rewriting, and still feel like nothing is quite good enough. Be sure to stay until the end. I'm going to show you what's actually driving this pattern and give you 3 practices you can use immediately. Save this video for later and subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the rest of this series. Early in my career, I watched brilliant people get passed over, not because they lacked skill, but because no one ever taught them how to connect with themselves and connect with others, how to read a room, or how to make people feel something. Hello, I'm Dr. RB. I'm a licensed psychologist, Hello, I'm Dr. RB. I'm a licensed psychologist, an expert in leadership development, and the president of Influens. We're a boutique firm and we develop leaders to make an impact using charisma and influence. On this channel, I bring you what I've learned from 20 plus years coaching C-suite leaders, building leadership programs for Fortune 500 companies, and studying the science of emotional intelligence, all distilled into practical tools that you can use the moment you step back into the meeting room. If you're returning, thank you so much for being here. And if you're new here, I want you to leave every video thinking, feeling, or doing something differently than when you first arrived. That's a standard that we hold ourselves up to here. Welcome to Series 2. We're doing the inner critic, and today we're looking at the form the inner critic most likes to take in high-achieving leaders, perfectionism. Because perfectionism doesn't announce itself as fear, it presents as excellence. And that's exactly what makes it so difficult to see and so costly when it goes unexamined. Let's start with a definition, because most people think perfectionism means wanting things done well. It doesn't. Perfectionism is the belief that your worth is contingent on your output. And I'm going to repeat that. It's a belief that your worth is contingent on your output, that you are valuable because you produce excellent work, and therefore anything less than excellent is a threat, not to the project, but to you. That's a crucial distinction. A leader who wants things done well can recognize good work. They can delegate clearly and accept that 85% is often good enough. A perfectionist leader cannot, because accepting good enough feels like accepting that they are not enough. The inner critic drives this. In episode 1, we talked about how the inner critic forms in childhood as a protective mechanism that criticizes you before anyone else could. Many perfectionists grew up in environments where love, approval, or safety were contingent on performance, on behavior. The inner critic learned, if I keep the standard high enough, no one can reject me. That worked once, twice in an environment where your worth was being evaluated by others. But now you are a leader, and the standard you're using on yourself you are now applying to every person on your team, which means the inner critic isn't just shaping how you see yourself, it's shaping how you see them. It's also shaping your organization. Let's reflect. If you need to stop this to get yourself a journal or some writing notes, please do. First reflection. I want you to think of the last time someone on your team brought you something that wasn't quite right. What was your internal response, and how quickly did it arrive? At Influens, we work with leadership teams using structured psychometric and 360-degree assessment tools. And when we look at leaders who score high on perfectionism measures, we see a consistent cluster of behaviors reported by their team. Teams describe these leaders as rarely satisfied even with strong work, reluctant to delegate, and when they do, they redo the work anyway. Slow to celebrate wins, quick to identify what's missing, creating an environment where people are afraid to make mistakes. And here is what matters most. Psychological safety scores in these teams are significantly lower. Psychological safety, Amy Edmondson's research at Harvard has documented this extensively. It's the single strongest predictor of a team learning, innovating, and having high performance. It's the belief that you can take risks, ask questions, and make mistakes without being punished. Perfectionist leaders systematically undermine psychological safety, not intentionally, but their message, their behavior sends, however, unconsciously is. Your work is never quite good enough. And when people feel that message, they stop taking risks. And I hate to say this, but what comes to mind is the movie The Devil Wears Prada with Meryl Streep. And here is a perfect example. No one is good enough. Whenever somebody enters the office, she gives that look up and down, constant judgment. You get the idea. People will stop bringing ideas before they're polished. They stop asking for help and production drops. The perfectionist leader, ironically, is producing the very outcome they fear the most, a team that underperforms. So that's exactly what happens, and they contribute to it. I've seen this in assessment after assessment, as well as my work with individual leaders doing executive coaching, as well as with team performance. The leader who works the hardest on the team, who genuinely cares more than anyone, who believes their standards are protecting the organization, that leader is often the one creating a culture of quiet disengagement. Because the inner critic cannot be satisfied, and a team that cannot satisfy their leader eventually stops trying. Second reflection: when your team brings you something strong, do you lead with what's working or with what's missing? What does your first sentence usually sound like? There's a version of perfectionism that looks like leadership. It looks like caring deeply, like never settling, like being the hardest worker in the room. And it can be for a while. But here's what our assessment data consistently shows. Teams led by perfectionist leaders have lower psychological safety. People stop bringing half-formed ideas. They stop asking questions. They stop taking the kind of risks that produce innovation because the cost of not being excellent feels too high. The inner critic, imperfectionist leaders, they don't just shape how they see themselves, it shapes the entire culture of what's safe to bring to the table. The question isn't whether your standards are high, it's whether your team can do their best work under them or whether they've learned to hide. I want to offer a distinction that I find clarifying in leadership coaching. The difference between perfectionism and the pursuit of excellence. Excellence is a process-oriented approach. It asks, what does great work look like here? What do we need to get there? It's curious, collaborative, and developmentally focused. It celebrates progress. It can recognize when something is done and celebrate the wins. Perfectionism is outcome-oriented, but the outcome is never fixed because the real function is to manage the inner critic's anxiety. Perfectionism asks, is this good enough yet? And the answer is almost always not quite. Here's a practical test I use with leaders. When a team member does solid, competent work, not extraordinary, but generally good, can you say so clearly, warmly, without immediately pivoting to what could be done better? If that sentence is difficult to say, and for many perfectionist leaders it is, that's the inner critic speaking, not you. The part of you that learned that praising good is the same as lowering the standard. It isn't. Recognizing good work clearly and specifically is what teaches people what excellence looks like. It's the most powerful developmental tool a leader has. And the inability to do it is not high standards, it's fear. Here's the third reflection. In the last month, when did someone on your team do genuinely solid work? And what did you actually say to them? Here are three concrete practices that you can take into the next week. So, practice one, the good enough audit. For 1 week, I want you to track the decisions you made that were driven by not quite right yet and identify what the cost was: time lost, energy spent, a team member's confidence deflated. This isn't about lowering standards. It's about seeing clearly what perfectionism is actually costing you and your team. Practice two, the first sentence rule. I want you to commit to a simple practice. The first sentence after someone shares their work will acknowledge something that is genuinely working, not performatively specifically. This opening section is clear and I see what you're arguing. Something like that. Or then something else that you can pick up and say, yes, that's good. Then you can go to the development. This isn't softness, it's precision. It teaches your team where the target is, and it builds a psychological safety that enables them to keep reaching for it. Practice three. Ask for a 360. If you haven't received structured, anonymous feedback from your team about your leadership style, now is the time to do it. And 360 is such a great way of doing this. The inner critic will rationalize anything you observe yourself. What it can't easily rationalize is what 30 people say about you in a validated assessment, especially when the pattern becomes very clear. The more people saying the same thing, the more validity there is. At Influens, this is the work that we do with leadership teams, not just identifying the gap, but creating structured support for closing it. Because the inner critic doesn't surrender to willpower, it surrenders to evidence, relationship, and sustained practice. Here is what I want you to hold from today. Perfectionism isn't the enemy of excellence. In the right doses, it has driven extraordinary work. But at the leadership level, it becomes something different. A transmission system for the inner critic's anxiety sent straight into the culture of your team. And your team deserves a leader who can tell them clearly when their work is good, who can hold a standard while also holding their humanity. Who knows the difference between this needs to be better and I can't tolerate anything less than perfect because I can't tolerate that about myself? That distinction is the work of conscious leadership. Not softer, not lower standards. Clear, more honest, more human. I write more about this in the EQ Executive newsletter on LinkedIn. I'll have the link below. There's a longer reflection on the assessment data behind the perfectionist leadership. And if you like that, please put it in the comments and I'll get that to you. At Influens, we offer leadership consulting and coaching that uses structured psychometric assessment to help leaders see clearly and change what they see. If your team is navigating a growth phase and you sense this pattern may be present, I'd welcome a conversation. The link is below. If today's message resonated with you, subscribe, like, or share. It really helps the work reach those that need it the most. Until next time, this is Dr. RB at Influens. You're guided, you're loved, and your path is most sacred.